Good morning and welcome to our online lesson for this morning. We just want to let you know that we've been in prayer for you all. If you're still at home and can't get out to church right now, we miss you in a big way, and we are in prayer for you. So if there's anything we can be doing for you, please call us and let us know. So we're going to take a little bit of a break from our series in 1 John, and let me tell you why. Because in person, this Sunday or today, we actually have a visiting speaker. He's our Bill Wharton, our missionary to Ukraine, is here with us. He's teaching our adult Bible class, and he is giving the sermon for this morning. And so I want to take a pause with you from 1 John today, and we're going to talk about one different topic that I think is so important for us right now. And I want to let you know that if you're interested in hearing what he has to say, get in touch with us, and we can get an audio CD or something made out so that you can definitely listen to that. So when I was in college, I played some basketball. Now, don't get too thrilled with that. I was not on like a big basketball team. I was officially on a college team, but it was kind of the equivalent of like playing intramurals at a bigger school. We were the team that people would beat up on. So we actually had big schools that would pay us to come play against them as like a practice game so they can get ready to play the real teams. I'm sad that I admitted that on a public forum like this. I wish that you could think higher of me when it came to my basketball skills. But even within our team, I naturally, for some reason, ended up being, from my sophomore year on, kind of like a captain of the team. And we went through coaches pretty often. I was going to try to find an analogy there, but I didn't want to do that. Mostly because I wanted to say, as churches go through, and that's not true. But we went through coaches pretty quickly. Where we had probably in my 4 years at college, we had 3 different head coaches, and I will never forget one of those coaches is a guy that many of you may know because he went to the Bible school when he was young. Is Tim McMullen. And Tim McMullen is, in the past few years, has passed away. We miss him completely. But when I say that name, a lot of you could think of his voice. It was real raspy. And man, when he spoke, it was loud, and you knew it was him. And here's one thing that I remember is that year that he was coaching us, he was one of our assistant coaches. It was one of the most frustrating years that I ever had. And it wasn't because of him, but it's because it was a year that we were kind of rebuilding. It was a year that we were taking an offense that we had and totally revamping it. We were revamping our defense that was working, and it was just frustrating. And I remember at one point, Coach Mack, which is what we called him, he set me down in his raspy voice because I was obviously getting frustrated. Like I was at the point where I was frustrated with me, I was frustrated with my teammates because they wouldn't get it, and it was just getting really built up, and it was causing me to act less than like a captain. And Coach Mack pulled me aside and he said, "Kenny, I want you to know something very, very important." And in his raspy voice, he said, "I want you to understand that if you're frustrated, you're growing." And at the time, I wrote that off. Like, okay, what does this guy know? But as I look back on that experience and I look back on a lot of areas of my life, here's what I realized, is that when I'm comfortable, I'm not growing. But when I feel uncomfortable, or in this case, frustrated, it was because I was learning and growing. And so all it took was me accepting that to really get to the point where I looked at this situation differently. I wasn't frustrated because people didn't know what they were doing anymore. I was hopeful that they're frustrated just like I was, and so we're all growing together. And it turned out that towards like mid-season, that ended up being the best team that we ever had. It took a little bit of frustration in the learning process, but once we accepted the frustration and got towards this idea that we're actually growing together, the culmination of it was actually pretty cool, maybe even quite beautiful. You know, in our lives, this lesson is going to come up often because all of us are going to have things that pop into our lives that frustrate the mess out of us. Things that we would rather not have in our lives, situations that we would rather just pass away, like get rid of it. Listen, if you're anything like me, I will literally even pray to God, can you please just take this away from me? Take this struggle that I have away from me. You might have even stopped at one point and said, this person is such a burden. Will you just take this person away from me? You might feel this way at your job where you're just frustrated. It might be from leadership. It might be from subordinates. It could be from anywhere. And we might regularly think, hey, the best solution would be for us to just get rid of this. I've been there, and I know a lot of you have too. But I want to ask you to consider a very biblical principle that I actually learned from Coach Mack, that it's when we're frustrated is when we're growing. Of course, you know, I'm going to go to James chapter 1, and we're going to spend some time elsewhere as well. But in James 1, beginning in verse 2, here's what James says. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. There is so much that I learned from that one little section of scriptures there that I just want to share with you today and ask you to start thinking about life in a different way. Instead of asking God to get rid of our trouble situations, can we ask God to help us grow because of our trouble situations? You know, I imagine it would sound really good for a lot of us to have a life that was free from struggles, that was free from annoyances, that was free from distractions. But that is not our reality, and it probably never will be. So instead of running from the things that are troubling us, or begging God to take those things away, and then here's what we do on the other side. When those situations stay there, we just assume that God hasn't answered our prayers. But in reality, what he might be doing is saying, you're going to stay right here in this situation because I want you to grow from it and learn from it. It's not always pleasant. Listen, again, I've been there. But look at the effects of staying in our struggles and looking at them differently. First of all, he says, count it joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. And this isn't talking about temptation necessarily. This is talking about just rough circumstances. This is talking about persecution maybe, or struggles that we're going through. It could be interpersonal struggles. It could be struggles like just frustrations or doubts or whatever it may be. But he's saying this, when you change your mind about them, you can start to consider it joy because you know the effects of what's about to come. And here's the effects. You know that the testing of your faith, those struggles that you're going through, those trials that you're going through, they will produce steadfastness or perseverance is what some other versions will use here. And here's the cool thing is that perseverance isn't the end game. It's not like, I know a lot of us aren't sitting down praying for perseverance. That's not our goal. Here's our goal. We want to be complete people. We want to be lacking nothing. Like if we're talking spiritually, I want to make sure that I'm well-rounded, I'm mature, I'm lacking nothing. But that will never come from an easy life. In fact, it will only come from trials that we go through. That's why in verse 4 he says, and let steadfastness have its full effect, or perseverance have its full effect, or take its full course, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And I've always wondered, like, why would wisdom be the next step? Right? Why would he then just naturally turn to, if you lack wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it'll be given to him. And of course, you have to ask without doubting, because if you doubt, you'll receive nothing. You're like a wave of the sea that's just driven and tossed by the wind. And we don't want to be double-minded. We don't want to be unstable. We want to pray in faith. But why wisdom? Why wisdom right there? Why couldn't he say, if any of you lacks, and you can just fill in the blank, like trust in God. If any of you lacks strength, if any of you lacks, and you name it, it would be easier to name something other than wisdom here. But that's not the case. He says wisdom. And I really think this is why. Because wisdom allows us to take a hard time and turn it around into something good. You know, a lot of wisdom is our growth and our learning from situations and experience. This is why a lot of us assume that wisdom comes from older age. Now, we know biblically that that's not always the case. Of course, age does give us more experience, but the purpose here is learning from experience. You and I have both met older people who have gone through a lot of stuff but never learned anything from it. And we also know back in Job, when Elihu says, look, the wisdom doesn't come from years, it comes from the measure of a spirit, the Spirit of God in a man. And so we know there's a lot more than just gray hair that brings wisdom. But here's the thing. Wisdom will allow us to go through our struggles and still consider it joy. Wisdom allows us to look at our problems and say, you know what? This isn't the real issue. The real issue is, how am I going to grow because of these problems? Listen, the good news is we're not doing this alone. The Apostle Paul dealt with this in a gigantic way. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, again, I'm just going to remind you of something today. In verse 7, he says, so to keep me from being or becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. And Paul did exactly what you and I would do. We would pray that problem just be taken away. He said, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. So he was going through struggles. He didn't count it joy. He was just asking for God to take the struggle away. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I'm content with weakness, insults, hardship, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Can you imagine this life today with that kind of mindset? Look, all of us right now can sit down and list out a million different struggles that we've had this past week. We can list out annoyances that we've had. We can list out weaknesses that we know we have, insults that we have been given, hardships that are going on in our lives, maybe even persecutions and calamities as well, like things that happen to us that are outside of our own doing. They're just things that happen. And all of us can list all those things. And here's what we can do. A lot of times we go through all of those things and we pray that God will deliver us from them. And what we really mean is that God will remove them from us, exactly what Paul prayed for. But I would believe that God's response to you and me today would be the same as it was to Paul, where he says this, no, my grace is sufficient for you. And what he's saying there is this, is that if you are never brought to your weaker points, you will never experience the power that God can display in your life. Think about that. Instead of this week praying to get rid of your problems, praying to get rid of those people, praying to get rid of the weakness that you have, praying to get rid of the hardships you're going through, or praying to get rid of the calamities that are going on in your life that feel like there's no escape. Instead of praying for those to leave, pray for God to show up in those things. Why? Because His grace is sufficient for you. His power is made perfect in our weaknesses. Do you want an easy life? Or do you want to experience God's power? The hard thing is, some of us are going to say easy life. Well, you signed up for the wrong thing when you decided to follow Jesus. It was never promised us to have an easy life. And so our default has got to turn into, I want to see God at work. And you know what that does? That allows us to go through struggles, calamities, hardships, weaknesses, insults, all those things with a spirit of contentment, because we know that we could never beat them with our own power, and we can surrender them to God to act on His own power. So let me just leave you one more time with what Coach Mack told me in my most frustrating of times when I was playing basketball, because we weren't winning games. I'll tell you that much. That was frustrating. Our team wasn't gelling together. That was frustrating. Nobody was invested, it seemed like, in learning anything new. And that was a problem. I was frustrated. I was ready to quit. I was going to throw in the towel, give my jersey back, and move on to something that was more important. I was ready to say, let me just get rid of it altogether because I don't want to do it anymore. Until one man spoke up and said the equivalent of James chapter 1, where he said, listen, here's the thing. You want to be a man? You take your struggles, you take the problems you're facing, and you realize this: if you're frustrated, you're growing. And I want you to think about that for this week. You're going to go through times that are hard. You're going to face the hardships, the calamities, and all those things. Stop just living in frustration. Stop begging God to take those away from you, because they might just be there for you to grow and to experience the real true depth of God's power. When you're frustrated, you're really growing. Love you, Orange Avenue.